A new week with new names ensnared in sexual harassment allegations. While some careers end, others vow to press on. Will California voters have the final say on the latest gas tax? The repeal effort launched this week in San Diego. And a new tool to help San Diego's homeless as giant tents go up around the city. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Michael Smolens, columnist for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Michael.
Mark, how are you doing?
Good to have you here today. Union Tribune, KPBS investigative reporter Meetha Sharma. I got you working for two organizations. Hi, Meetha.
Hi, Mark.
Reporter Susan Murphy of KPBS News. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Mark. Good to be here.
Good to have you. And Rob Nikolewski, who covers energy for the Union Tribune. Hi, Rob.
Good to be back.
Glad you're back today. Well, the docket is jammed in the court of public opinion. 4 years after San Diego Mayor Bob Filner was driven from office, powerful men in politics, entertainment, journalism, and other walks have been accused of unwanted sexual behavior. Newly empowered women emerged to make head-spinning allegations in an atmosphere quite different from when Clarence Thomas and Bill Clinton were confronted decades ago. It seems a vastly changed atmosphere from even a year ago when Donald Trump was accused of sexual impropriety by more than a dozen women. Meetha, start there. Is this a watershed moment here? And it also kind of started with this Hollywood producer and the allegations against Harvey Weinstein.
I think it's too soon to tell if it's a watershed moment. And I say that, yes, I mean, there's colossal change in there from the perspective of powerful men are being accused, and once investigations are being done, the investigations are quick and evidence is scrutinized, these guys are gone. And
in certain areas, yeah.
In certain areas. And then women are feeling, as you said, emboldened to come forward. But this issue, this problem is so pervasive. It's so widespread. There was a Quinnipiac University poll that came out recently that showed 60% of the women have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. That's a very high number. And that tells us that sexual harassment training isn't necessarily working. I think what needs to happen for this to be a true watershed moment is for laws to change. And one of those laws could be getting rid of these non-disclosure agreements that we've seen in settlement agreements, like with Fox News, where people who had been accused and settled continued to work and continued to victimize.
Mm-hmm. Now, Michael, you wrote this week about, kind of brought this around locally to powerful local labor leader Mickey Kasparian, and briefly remind us about the lawsuit against him. And we talked about that in the show, and it was just in May, but maybe this climate changes everything from just a few months ago when that was
well, it's in the
surface.
legal realm now, and you know, Mickey Kasparian isn't a household name. He's not a publicly elected official, but he's a very powerful labor leader, as we know. And I think it was almost 2 years ago, a lawsuit was filed by a woman named Isabel Vasquez, longtime employee who claimed she was pressured into a sexual relationship with him for years, which is a little different than the kind of other, more brief encounters. So that's wending its way through the court. It gets complicated, and it's not diminished by, but there's been a huge fight within organized labor in San Diego. In fact, that Kasparian was the head of the San Diego and Imperial Counties Labor Council, along with the United Food and Commercial Workers. And so he split off from the Labor Council. He might have been on his way out because of all this and other problems, to create a new organization. So there's a lot of turmoil that is beyond that in the way he's operated. He was the head of that for, I think, 15 years. But the significance is it's a very politically powerful group, and the Labor Council was an umbrella group of a lot of unions, so now they're split. Will they get together politically in this coming election year, because they've really had a lot of influence in local elections, as we know, at City Hall and throughout the county. But
this whole thing kind of lingers there. And Meetha, I want to get back briefly to Bob Filner. You interviewed the first 8 or 9 women who came out together to make those allegations. Of course, it led to the former mayor's downfall politically here. So difficult for women to come forward. Is it easier now in this new climate because of all these allegations and the national debate on it?
I don't know. I mean, it's difficult for women to come forward because they fear that nobody's going to believe them. They feel ashamed. They feel embarrassed. They feel guilty. They think they might have done something to provoke the misconduct. They fear retaliation. They don't want to hamper their career. But let's not forget that in these most recent cases that we've heard about, and in the case of Filner, some women did come forward, and they were told to ignore it or to forget about it, or they developed a workaround. In the case of Filner, I remember then City Attorney Jan Goldsmith saying that he didn't want any of the women attorneys in his office to work alone with Bob Filner. So is now a more decent climate for these women to come forward? I don't know. I think if you're in a high-profile industry like media or politics or entertainment, yes, I think it is. Now, it's easier for women to come forward. I think they are going to be believed more so than they were before. But if you're in one of those industries that's traditionally exploitive, like migrant workers, or the janitorial industry, or the food service
where all
industry,
workers are kind of powerless.
They're powerless. There's a huge power differential between the employees and the employer. I don't think it's any easier for them to come forward.
All right, I did want to talk for a moment about the range of accusations here, and I've got to refer to my notes because we got a long list here. So does the published distinguish between the boorish behavior admitted by Senator Al Franken, child molestation allegations against Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore, various revelations about comedian Louis C.K., Congressman John Conyers, news figures like Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, Garrison Keillor, Michael Oreskes of NPR, and of course, Donald Trump. We got a broad range of allegations. Can the public kind of sort out specifically on each one and take it a case by case, or are they all lumped together?
I think it's unclear. I mean, American voters elected a man who was accused by 16 women of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. They heard Donald Trump on that infamous 2005 Access Hollywood tape brag about sexually assaulting women, and they elected him anyway to the White House. Voters in Alabama might vote in a man who has been accused of sexually violating a 14-year-old girl. At the same time, we have men in these high-profile positions, Matt Lauer of the Today Show, Charlie Rose from CBS This Morning, for whom, once those allegations surfaced, investigations were done quickly, and they were gone. So I think, if people use common sense, then I think people can differentiate. But once politics enters into the discussion, Donald Trump said he would prefer to have Roy Moore, a Republican, an accused child molester, to serve in the U.S. Senate over a Democrat. House Majority Leader Paul Ryan has called for Democratic Congressman John Conyers to step down amid sexual harassment allegations, but he has not asked for Roy Moore to step aside as a candidate. Nancy Pelosi...
Actually, I think Ryan has. He said Moore should
Yes, he
step
said? Okay, so that's the latest.
Yeah, but that sets up a nice bite we have here from Ryan on NPR here this morning, and I wanted to toss to that. Here's some of this exchange between NPR interviewer and Speaker Paul Ryan.
I'm focused on Congress. Roy Moore is trying to come to Congress. My job here as Speaker of the House is to help make sure that Congress is an institution that we're proud of, and that's what I'm focused on. He's running for Congress, and I think the allegations against him were very, very credible.
All right, so that does say credible against Moore, according to Paul Ryan. Conyers, he said this week, should step down, the Democratic congressman from Michigan. But that same interviewer kind of seemed to bring up, well, what about Donald Trump? Shouldn't he resign if these other fellows? How do you distinguish that, Michael?
Well, when you're asking the House Republican leader, about the Republican president, of course you're going to get, a different kind of answer than they would have John Conyers, a Democrat. How do they distinguish? It's very difficult. It's very hard and sort of awful to say, but in a way, the public has been, a bit forgiving. I mean, you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger just before he was elected. It was, the LA Times came out with this big story about the groping aspect of his MO. Bill Clinton in office. I mean, people focus on Monica Lewinsky. However you view that, that did seem to be consensual. She hasn't, changed that, but there were others that were much more serious. Yet he left with, a job approval rating higher than Ronald Reagan in some polls. So it's a very difficult, complex, almost psychological thing, I think, in a lot of cases with voters, and in some cases there's been a certain denial. You certainly have what's going on in Washington. The different reactions from people that Moore has been accused of probably one of the more heinous things, and he just rejects that it ever happened.
Says everybody's lying.
Whereas others, have acknowledged to some degree, maybe not to the degree that satisfies a lot of folks.
But Al Franken has said, let's invite an ethics investigation.
But that's why, to your earlier question, that's why I think it's so hard to characterize this as a watershed moment, because we simply don't know. There's so much inconsistency. There's so much hypocrisy around this issue. There are double standards here.
Well, we're going to have an election again on December 12th, 11 days from now. And should Roy Moore win that Senate seat in Alabama this month, what will that mean for our national discussion of sexual harassment?
Well, it's clear that a certain component of the Republican Party thinks his vote is more important than any, I don't even want to call it a misdeed, because we're not talking about, it's not minimizing sexual harassment among adults, but that is different than, preying on, if you will, a 13 or 14-year-old.
Were it not for the statute of limitations, that's criminal.
Right.
That's criminal behavior.
Absolutely.
So, you sort of wonder about what it means for society overall if all these things get overlooked. But that one seems to have it takes it to a different level than, I don't want to minimize stuff as boorish behavior, but that's been I want to say for ill, not for good or ill, tolerated to some degree in politics, even when it's been out there.
Now, a year ago, as I said earlier in the outset here, a bunch of women, I think the number's up to 16, have come forward and accused Donald Trump after the Access Hollywood tape. And it should be noted this week he cast some doubt whether that was him on the tape, which is rather astonishing to a lot of people. But with those women coming forward now, and of course he's called them all liars, said he was going to sue them. He's never filed any lawsuits. Would that be changed in this, quote, zero tolerance atmosphere we have now, Amitha, a year later, if those women came forward? Would the candidate have really been disqualified? I
don't know that it would, because I think Donald Trump is simply in a different category altogether. Things don't seem to stick. Allegations don't seem to stick with him. That said, there is a woman who was one of the original accusers. Her name is Summer Zervos. After he called his accusers liars, she filed a defamation lawsuit against him. She's being represented by Gloria Allred.
I believe that's in New York State Court.
That's in New York State Court. And oral arguments are scheduled for next week. Whether that gets any traction, I don't know. I know that Trump's lawyers are asking for the case to be thrown out, or at least delayed until he leaves office.
Okay. I want one last, I'll just throw this out to the whole panel, to Susan and Rob here. Are men finally put on notice? Is it far more sensitive now in behavior in the workplace? I know a lot of us, Michael, you and I had training at the Union Tribune on this years ago. We've done it online here at KPBS, Public Broadcasting. A lot of corporations do. Some don't. Congress this week is finally going to do this. Rob, do you think men are finally kind of getting the message and more on notice in the workplace?
Maybe, but then it also comes back to the point that you see across the spectrum when it comes to morality. If you have a sensitivity training, well, maybe the guys that are more sensitive, maybe that sinks in. For the guys who aren't, maybe it doesn't sink in, and those are maybe possibly the guys that are more likely to do this. Two things struck me this week. First of all, I think Hugh Hefner picked a good time to kick the bucket. And also, I think what's interesting is that when you see a lot of these accusations that have been made in this latest round, since the Harvey Weinstein thing, all of the men are over 50. We're not talking about young guys who are... So it's a generational thing is what you're saying. I mean, well, you would think that if you had told someone 2 months ago, we're going to have this big sexual harassment situation, I think maybe people think, well, okay, maybe it's a bunch of young guys who are inexperienced or their hormones are raging or whatever. But these are, Charlie Rose is 75.
Right.
I mean, all these guys are older guys. I think that makes it much more disturbing.
All right, we're going to have to move on to the next topic here, but we haven't heard the end of this, and of course we've got that Alabama election coming up, and we'll have another bites at this apple, unfortunately. Well, the first of San Diego's large tent structures for homeless people is to open today, Friday. Susan, start by telling us about the structure and the total of 3 that are coming. What do they look like?
Okay, so the first structure opened today. It's on 16th and Newton Street in Barrio Logan. It's basically this large dome tent, a great big huge tent that has 350 beds, bunk bed style. The women will be in the front, the men in the back. This is for, single adults. It has an abundance of services from healthcare to treatments for, addiction problems. There are all sorts of facilities, bathrooms, showers, laundry, and is a place for people to connect with their social workers. People know where to find them. It's also very low barrier. We know that in other emergency shelters, they haven't been able to bring their pets or their belongings. And so in the Alpha Project tent, people can bring their service animals. They can bring 2 bags full of stuff. They can come and go as they please. They don't have to get up at 5:30 in the morning. And I believe I did talk to Amy Gagno. She is with the Alpha Project, the organization running this first tent opening today.
Yeah, we've got that fight. Yeah, we want to toss to that.
We don't want any barriers to entry here. We just want to help them. So once they get in and they have some issues, we engage and try to get them, either they need a treatment facility or whatever needs they have. We encourage and we just keep on them.
All right, other big tents opening in a couple of weeks. So how do they differ from this initial one?
So a couple blocks away, actually, like basically kitty corner, almost a stone's throw away, is going to be the family tent, and also will hold single women. We know that in the campground that opened in Golden Hill, where there were 200, individual tents for people, that there were, 40 children who showed up. They weren't expecting that many children. Yeah, that surprised
people, didn't it?
They were expecting maybe a handful of children. And that has grown. That number has grown. They've placed several families from the campgrounds, but now they're up to almost 50 children as of about last week. So all of those families and children and both parents, moms and dads, will be able to come and stay at this other tent that's located on the back lot of Father Joe's Villages. And so this will have, beds and cribs. And the thing about St. Vincent, they have the children at their facility because they do have a therapeutic child care center. They have licensed child care and classrooms and playgrounds and facilities to help children. The only issue, of course, is that this campus is already, full. Mm-hmm. They have 160 other kids living on their campus in the family transitional shelter. So there is capacity limits, and so depending if they have, multiple toddlers that move into this big dome tent structure or teens, they don't know if they'll be able to bring these kids to these special facilities.
Have to expand staff.
Sure.
Give us a little step back on the numbers. I mean, roughly how many homeless people can find shelter this winter? How many are going to still be left fending for themselves on the streets?
The 3 tent structures will hold 700 people. The third is total. Located on Sports Arena. It's for veterans. That will hold 200. And so, we have thousands of homeless people that are living on the streets. Our count in January showed almost 6,000 people counted sleeping on park benches and sidewalks. Mm-hmm. So there will be many without, a bed this winter.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
Well, just, you both touched on it, but I think the remarkable thing about both the tent city that they created, or the tent camp, the sanctioned tent camp, and now this is the children. And it's, it's a heartbreaking situation in San Diego and elsewhere, but the face has always been, adults, mental illness, and other really bad and hard luck stories. But that's the thing that I think made everybody kind of really pause. And will that start giving further momentum? I mean, there's a lot of things in play moving forward, and I know there's a lot of controversy. As good as these temporary situations are, people didn't want those because they thought that, or some didn't, mm-hmm. because they thought that detracted from the housing first and the more permanent thing. And so we'll have to see. Now they're sort of saying they can do it on both tracks. Mm-hmm. It's an awful lot of energy and focus and resources to do this. Will they be able to keep those things on track? And we know how difficult getting any kind of housing in San Diego is.
Yeah, give us the last word on that.
Yeah, that's the goal, is to cycle people through these tents as quickly as possible and to get them into permanent housing situations. They are giving priority to people with housing vouchers in addition to the people moving over from the campground. So the housing navigators can work with people and get them into permanent places to live.
All right, we'll be looking forward to an update on that story as we move ahead and all these shelters open up. Well, a recent hike in California gas taxes is being challenged by a petition drive backed by conservatives. Republican Carl DeMaio, former San Diego City Councilman, spearheads this effort. Now, Rob, start with the hike. Give us the high points of what this hike went into effect, started in November 1st, and how much money is it going to raise, and how much are we talking about?
Well, the SB 1 is a Senate bill that was passed. It's already starting this month. It raised the price of gasoline 12 cents. The idea is that it will raise about $52 billion over the next decade to help California's crumbling infrastructure, roads, highways, culverts, bridges, things like that.
But your story said the backlog, and we really need 130 billion, so it's only a fraction of that.
Right, and the political controversy that has erupted has been that there's this group. Actually, there's a couple of different repeal efforts, but the one here in San Diego that got kicked off this week was by, as you said, former council member Carl DeMaio. What they want to do is repeal the gas tax because they say that too much of that money has been wasted, and they say that in the past, and this is true, that a lot of the money that has been earmarked for bridges and roads and road repairs has been siphoned off. And I checked on that, and yes, and that has been by both Republican and Democrat governors. Mm-hmm. So the concern of the DeMaio et al. People is that this is going to happen again. Now, the defenders of SB 1 say there have been protections put in place this time that will prevent that from happening.
And the folks who want to repeal this, what do they say? Well, what are we going to do about that $130 billion? The roads are crumbling. The infrastructure needs help. If you get rid of this, what's their solution to the problems?
They say that Caltrans should run more efficiently and that the money that was originally dedicated for roads and bridges in the past should be used for that purpose.
Okay, would that be enough to get anywhere near this big backlog?
Well, even the supporters of SB 1 say that it'll make a major first step towards that. And it's a pretty wide-ranging proposal. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty, it's not a proposal. It's now state law because Governor Brown signed it into law in April.
Mm-hmm. Now, this effort to get rid of this and repeal this tax, overturn it and all, and you say there's dueling ones, but the voters might have a chance then in 2018 to weigh in on all of this, and is it too early to tell whether it might succeed?
Well, the DeMaio people need 585,000 signatures from registered voters. They're planning, or they hope to get 700,000 by March. That way, because always
some are going to fall out.
Get thrown out. Mm-hmm. If that happens, if they're able to get that by March, then it will be on the ballot in November. Now, to make things, it's already a complicated story, it's a political story, and make it even more complicated.
Make it more complicated.
Make it more complicated. In June, there's a proposal that supporters of the bill have that will go before voters in June that would have what they call a lockbox, that would to enshrine the fact that, yes, this time the money will be devoted strictly to roads. So that's going to happen in June. Then the DeMaio, if it happens, if they get enough signatures, the DeMaio bill and also another proposal from Travis Allen, that would be up in November.
Okay, so we will see then, the voters may next year be able to weigh in and get these dueling measures and see what happens if this thing survives. Well, before we close today, I did want to ask about a key ruling by the California Public Utilities Commission this week. What's that news going on? Who's going to pay the damage for those terrible 2003 wildfires?
SDG&E asked the California Public Utilities Commission for $379 to spread throughout ratepayers.
$375 million.
Yeah, $379 million, yes. And the CPUC on Thursday morning said, no thanks. No, that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, Amitha, you've reported on this story all along as well. What took so long on this ruling? They've gone back and forth. There have been tentative rulings, preliminary rulings, delays.
Well, actually, this was the third time that SDG&E had asked for reimbursement on those fires. So I don't know that it took that long. I think the case started late last year or January of this year, and then in
this
August,
particular go-around.
in this particular go-around. And two administrative law judges were very clear back in August that look, SDG&E, you didn't properly manage your equipment before these fires. Mm-hmm. So because you didn't prudently or reasonably manage your equipment, customers should not have to cover these costs.
Mm-hmm. And real quickly, it's not over yet. SDG&E and its parent company, Sempra Energy, says they're going to fight this in court.
Well, right, so that's the question I have. They said that they were going to explore every avenue to get this decision overturned. So they take it to court. But doesn't the court traditionally like to keep this at the PUC?
Yeah, I would think that they probably that a court would probably look favorably on what the CPUC did, but when we take a case to court, who knows what's going to happen if how a judge is going to decide.
And wasn't this a symbolic thing? It wasn't that much money for each individual ratepayer here, but who's going to pay for it, the shareholders or the customers, right?
It was $1.67 a month over 6 years. The key issue was that I think a lot of ratepayers felt like SDG&E's lines started those fires. A state inquiry found that SDG&E did not properly design, build, or maintain those lines, so they found it very galling that they would be asked to pay, however small the amount, that they would be asked to pay for the
So there was a
costs.
principle at stake here.
But how easy
Couple
would
of seconds.
it be to implement another fee, $1.67 per month to people's bill?
Well, that's the question. I mean,
Well, they can't pass it on strictly in this case.
Well, we'll have to
but
see
they
if they
can
pass it
on
on.
in another way. I mean, they can try at least.
All right, we're out of time. We'll see what happens going forward on that one as well. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union Tribune, Amitha Sharma of KPBS News, Susan Murphy, also of KPBS News, and Rob Nikolewski of the Union Tribune. Reminder, all the stories we discussed today available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.